Good evening, good evening, good evening. It is election eve in Chicago. It is election eve in Chicago, and I am excited to kind of engage in this very important democratic activity of voting tomorrow. I want to show a short video. I was in my class with my students, and we were just kind of talking about this. And I just wanted to hop on for a few minutes tonight and just share kind of what on earth we're feeling and thinking about in our city and what needs to happen. So I'm going to share a couple things here. I'm just going to hang out for a little bit tonight. I know that so many people around the country are thinking about this city and what it means and what we have to do to really make this place great. And I don't want to say great again. My God, I don't want to say that. But I do want to say that there's a lot to discuss. I'm going to show a short clip here just to get us connected and going on this. Then I'm going to hop back on and talk a little bit about what we ought to be doing to deal with kind of some of these issues and what's going to happen in tomorrow's mayoral race. So here we go.
It was another deadly weekend in Chicago. At least 14 people were shot and 3 people were killed by gun violence in that city. More than 70 people have been murdered in Chicago already this year. As John Yang reports, crime has become the top issue in tomorrow's mayoral election.
Miracle Boyd,
think of like the violence that's been happening,
and Carrie Hogan, two lifelong Chicago residents from 2 different neighborhoods and 2 different perspectives.
Sometimes I do get numb.
Boyd grew up on Chicago's gritty South Side. Just 21 years old, she says she's already seen far too much gun violence.
My brother was shot entering my freshman year of high school.
Her father, brother, and uncle have all been shot. One, she said, was mistaken identity. Another, a case of wrong place, wrong time. Many of those she grew up with have also been victims of gun violence.
I can count on more than both of my hands how many classmates have died, because it's more than 10 since elementary school all the way through high school. I wouldn't like to say that some of our high schools and some of our youth are cursed, but that's what it's seeming to be.
I literally dropped to the ground. I was laying on the sidewalk thinking, I don't want to be the next person on the news that's killed by a stray bullet.
Hogan is an attorney who lived in a North Side neighborhood for nearly 2 decades and saw it change after a family member was shot during a botched carjacking.
Get your frisbee, let's go.
Hogan and her 2 chocolate labs packed up and moved to a sleek neighborhood in the center of the city.
I'm living in a condo, so I have a door person now. I have 24-hour security. It just seems safer. It might be an illusion, but I feel safer here because there are more people around and the neighborhood is lit up.
Ask each of them their top issue in tomorrow's nonpartisan mayoral election, and it may sound as if they're in agreement.
Public safety is the number one issue, and if we could address public safety, then we could address crime.
For me, crime affects everything. It's the only issue that matters in this election.
But for Carrie, the answer is more police.
You have less police generally, and then the police that are left don't feel empowered to really do anything. And so that is a perfect formula for crime.
And from Miracle's point of view, the police are irrelevant.
The police show up after the crime has already been committed. They don't show up to prevent.
Public safety means very different things to very different people in Chicago.
Heather Sharon is a reporter for WTTW, Chicago's PBS station. She says sentiments about crime in the city are as much about perception as reality.
We are seeing crimes and high-profile crimes in neighborhoods that are not used to being in the headlines for those reasons. And that, I think, can add to sort of people's sense that, well, I used to feel safe here, but I don't feel safe anymore. And that is really, in many ways, disconnected from what the reality of crime is.
Shootings spiked in Chicago during the pandemic. More than 800 people were murdered in 2021 alone. While the number of homicides dropped last year, reports of violent crimes continue to rise, up 12% since 2019, the year of the last citywide election. A recent poll found that nearly 2/3 of Chicago residents say they feel unsafe from gun violence and crime.
I'm not going to rest until we're the safest big city in the country.
That could spell trouble for Mayor Lori Lightfoot as she runs for a second term. She faces a crowded field. 8 challengers are trying to make her the first incumbent in decades to be defeated for re-election.
What we don't need is somebody who doesn't support the police and in fact wants to divert resources from the police to other projects.
The candidates are drawing sharp contrast over public safety and the city's police department, which remains under a consent decree imposed after the 2014 fatal police shooting of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald. Lightfoot points to a record as mayor, hiring more than 950 police officers last year and removing more than 12,000 guns from the city's streets.
We're bending the curve on violent crime.
Every one of Lightfoot's challengers has pledged to replace the police superintendent she appointed. Teacher turned Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson
what's up, Chicago?
Says he'd reallocate funds in the police department and focus on the root causes of crime by investing in schools and housing.
Over 40% of the violence that happens in the city of Chicago happens in 6% of the neighborhoods where I live.
Let's get Chicago back on track.
Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia says he'd increase staffing and improve data collection.
People need to feel safe to do business.
Balance for mayor.
And current frontrunner Paul Vallis, the former CEO of Chicago's schools, promises to hire 1,800 new officers with a focus on community policing.
Community policing is critical because, you can't have half of the high priority 911 calls not being responded to. So
that's an approach Carrie Hogan says turned this one-time Lightfoot voter onto a new candidate this year.
Why did you decide on Hall Vallis?
We have to give power back to our police. We have to put more police back on the streets. We have to start policing our city again to keep it safe. So Paul Vallis is the person that I think has the most rational, reasonable policies in that regard.
We're going to turn it over to our candidates.
In the closing days of the campaign, Miracle Boyd and the gun violence prevention organization she works with held a forum for Chicago's youth to engage directly with the candidates.
Our communities are suffering. Our youth are dying from gun violence.
Of the 4 candidates polling in double digits, only Johnson showed up.
I believe a better, stronger, safer Chicago is possible. We can build that together.
Johnson's plan for community-based interventions resonated with Boyd and was a big reason she says she's voting for him.
He's actually been in the communities, been on our talks, been on Zoom with us. The citizens of Chicago is calling for treatment, not trauma, and not police to show up.
While voters have been casting ballots for a month, it may be weeks before they know which candidate will be tasked with trying to lower crime in Chicago and to restore faith in the police department. If no candidate wins a majority of votes tomorrow, the top 2 finishers advance to a runoff in April. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm John Yang.
All right, folks, here we are. It's election eve in Chicago. I want to lay out a couple things that I think are critical, and I'm going to stay on for a few minutes tonight. But I'm excited about these things. I haven't done this in a little while. It's just been super busy. But it's also tomorrow's the last day of African American History Month, and I've been running around really the state like crazy, doing shows and speaking and things. But this is really important to me because I live in Chicago. My Chicago story starts in the Great Migration. Between 1917 and 1970, 7 million African Americans moved from the south to the north in the Great Migration. And so our family, my mother's side of the family, moved to Chicago in the 1950s from Slater, Mississippi. And my father's side of the family, my grandfather their people are from Georgia. And my grandmother, their people are from Louisiana. They both were here in Chicago before my dad was born. So Chicago has been a very important place for us. I was born in the suburbs here in 1976. My dad actually wanted us to not be born. My dad kind of had this bougie thing going on, which I appreciate. We were living in Inglewood. And my dad wanted me to be born in Palos. So we kind of went out there, and I was born out there, from what I understand, in Palos Heights, actually where my kids go to school right now, where they also believe Paul Dallas might be saying that was one of the rumors out there. But anyway, so that's that Chicago story. We lived on the South Side until I was 5, moved to Cal City, the South suburbs, as it was really experiencing white flight in the 1980s, which I didn't understand. We were part of the influx of people moving to the South suburbs in the 1980s. We moved to Calumet City in 1982, and the demographics of the community changed in the 8 years that we were there, and we left right before 1990. And so then we moved to South Bend, Indiana, and my parents have been in Indiana. My mom passed away in 2021. My dad is still in Indiana, and I went to school in New Jersey, and then I came back. I went to school in Indiana first, then I went to school in New Jersey, and I came back to school in Chicago, and I've been in Chicago for over 20 years now. The point is that this is our story, right? So I look at this city, and I have lived other places and could live other places. But I look at Chicago, and I look at all the possibilities that exist in the city. I look at the history that exists in the city. I look at the phenomenal artistry that exists in the city, the phenomenal corporate headquarters, and all of the dynamic parts of the city that exist that so many people still care about and still are concerned with. And then we sort of deal with these other challenges, right? The inequality, the poverty, those kinds of things. I want to talk about a few of those things and why they are related to this race so heavily. So talking about the crime issue particularly, because a lot of people have wanted to talk about that. We know that there were 70 people killed in the city this year, over 800 killed in 2021, actually. But if you understand the way the crime works, 2020, the crime rate jumped in America as a whole, the murder rate by 30%, the highest jump in murder rates that have ever been recorded since we started recording these issues. And so we understand that crime all across the country jumped. However, we know that Chicago has, because we are a large city, in the aggregate, we have the largest amount of this kind of violence in the country because of our size. And yet, when you look at crime data per capita, we don't even rank in the top 20. There are places like New Orleans and Memphis and all kinds of places around the country, Newark. You could look at Oakland. All across the country, these issues are heavy. And so what I want to say about this race, first and foremost, is that crime is an American problem. It's not a Chicago problem. Crime is an American problem. It's not a Chicago problem, first and foremost. And yet in this mayor's race, there's a lot of talk about this, right? Brandon Johnson, there are 9 candidates that are running. There are 7 African-American candidates. There's 1 Latino candidate, and there's 1 person of European descent, Caucasian candidate. And unfortunately, the city divides by race very heavily. And so there's a clear lane, if you will, for Paul Vallis in this situation. There may be a clear lane for Chuy Garcia, but the African-American candidates, there is not as clear of a lane, including the mayor. And so there's a lot of conversation about how do we deal with this, right? So Paul Vallis has argued that we need 1,800 new officers. Chuy Garcia has talked about staffing. Brandon Johnson has said that we need to invest in mental health. I've met Brandon, know Brandon. I've actually been around his people for some years now. And, when I was able to moderate a discussion with the candidates a few weeks ago, thanks to the Jack and Jill Foundation, and got to connect with many of them, Roger Sawyer, Sophia King, Jamal Green, even some connection with Willie Wilson as well. And so Brandon argues that it's all about mental health. Jamal Green argues the same thing. And yet many of the other candidates, Sophia King talks about we got to do policing and we got to do investments, right? And so how do we deal with this issue? We also know that if no one wins 50% of the vote tomorrow, 50% plus 1, then we will have a runoff. And that runoff will be held on April 4th, which is ironically the date of Dr. King's death, which I think is interesting because the West Side, which Brandon is from, was forever changed after April 4th, 1968. And to see us get a new mayor on April 4th again, I just wonder what the connection is there, right? And why that matters. And so we look at, there's a poll that I just saw from a company called 1983 Labs that put Vallis at 24%, Lightfoot at 18%, Chewy at 16%, and Brandon Johnson at 15%. But this poll is not like the ones I've seen before, because the other ones have put the mayor below Brandon and Chewy above the mayor and that sort of thing. And so we don't know where this is. We do know that the police, the FOP, are supporting Vallis. The SEIU and the teachers unions are supporting Brandon Johnson. And the mayor it seems that she's losing her base that she had. We also know that this is a really interesting election because we had over 200,000 people early vote. In 2019, we only had about 128,000, and we know that the pandemic changed everything. Most mayoral elections, most municipal elections, midterm elections, are about 33% people come out to vote. In the city of Chicago, we're at about 25%. They believe we might be at 40%, right? 50% of people still don't even vote till election day. That's me. I'm included in that number. I have not voted yet. So the question becomes, in all of this, through our little data and that sort of thing, what do we do? Where are we, and what does it mean? And why is Chicago so important in the city, in the nation around these issues? Well, obviously, we know Chicago is the third largest city in America. At one point, was the second largest city, and so LA overtook that in the 1970s. But what Chicago's really, in many ways, a microcosm of this whole nation. It's a very large, diverse city. It's a very unequal city. It's a very segregated city. It has a history of a great economy. And yet that great economy is hampered by the fact that we deal with this lingering inequality. Now, I ran for alderman back in 2015, and I remember what it was like on election eve and how nervous we were and what we were doing. I remember all the work that went into the campaigns. And so I spoke with the candidates a couple weeks ago. I thank them for their service, right? I thank them because they don't have to do this. And it's a lot of work. And it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of time, it's a lot of resources, it's a lot. So I say that to say, where do we go from here? And what does this race mean for us? And I will tell you that I am excited, but I'm fearful. Well, I'm not fearful. I'm not going to say I'm fearful. I'm a little nervous, right? I'm excited, but I'm a little nervous because I do think what happens in the political process matters. People oftentimes don't believe this, and what I teach every day is that the political process does matter. You can look at, for instance, and I will say this, the pandemic really, I believe, was the cause of the high spike in crime 2020, 2021. Our murder rate has gone down by 20% in 2022, and shootings down by 14%, and yet violent crime as a whole is still higher, right, than it was even before the pandemic. And so all of these things are happening at the same time, but these are larger issues we've got to deal with at the national level, state level, and the local level. We've got to do it together. I do like Sophia King's statement of both and rather than either or. I had a post a couple weeks ago that said maybe if all the candidates got together and we elected one, and then all other the candidates worked together, maybe we could actually solve some of the problems that we're facing in Chicago and around the nation. So what do we do, right? And how do we go forward? I'm not obviously going to tell you guys who to vote for. I'm not going to tell you who I'm voting for, although it's down to two people. I'm still kind of right there with these two people. But I will tell you that this is a very important race. I think all elections are important. The amount of funding that goes to neighborhood, I can say whether you like the mayor or not. There have been record investments in the Invest Southwest program. We've gotten arts funding in our work. I know other people that have gotten funding. It hasn't, necessarily been a panacea for certain things, but it has come. The mayor has gotten a reputation for not being a person that has won many friends in her work. And so whether she gives money or not, there are perception issues in politics. Perception is reality. So I just want to say, and I'm going to get off here in a second because I don't really like doing these for a very, very long time. But I will say that I hope that if you are in Chicago, you vote. I hope if you're not in Chicago that you care about this, because this is a very important city in America. If you believe in prayer, pray for us in Chicago. If you want to send money to a candidate in Chicago. You can do all of those things because this city matters. The history of the city is so important, and the future of the city is so important as well. And I really want to see the investments continue. I want to see crime to move in the opposite direction than it is, obviously, nationally in many ways. I want to see the American dream expanded to people all across this city and this nation. And that does not happen if you don't have the right political leadership. It just does not happen. The investments that are made are often made in areas that, and I believe oftentimes, and this is where some of the candidates even said as well, which I agree with. If you don't invest in people, we're going nowhere, right? We're going nowhere. So, Dr. King famously said, I love my Dr. King quotes. He famously said, we cannot have a first-class nation with second-class citizens. I would say the same thing about our country, about our city. We cannot have a first-class city with second-class citizens. And on that note, for those of you guys who are getting ready to vote tomorrow, when you go to the polls, think about that and think about what that means. And think about how we move towards a safer, stronger, more prosperous city. I love this city. And most of the people that I love are connected to the city in some way, shape, or form. And a lot of people I love in New Jersey too, but in some other places, Arizona and California, whatever. But a good proportion of them are connected to the city in some way. So we got to keep fighting. And I'm hopeful about tomorrow. I hope you are as well. I'm not gonna make any predictions, but it's a very important race. So have a good night, everyone. Take care. And go vote and support. And believe in prayer. And keep hope alive, as Reverend Jesse Jackson would say. If we don't have hope, we don't have anything. So take care. Have a good night. And we'll get back on here and see what happens after tomorrow.